Today we're going to be going over what's called direct variation, which is actually a lot like proportions. It's actually the same thing as proportional relationships, which is what we did yesterday, where we were trying to figure out if something had a proportional relationship, and we were trying to figure out if it went through 0, 0, and all that good stuff. It's the same thing. It's just under a different name. And then you solve direct variations using proportions instead of the same exact type of stuff that we did yesterday. So first off, I want to do a little quick review right here. So it says, what does each letter represent in this equation? So they're really just pointing at the M and they're pointing at the B. What does the M mean in this equation? Always, always, always. Slope. And we have to remember, slope measures the steepness of a line. Okay, so how steep it is. All right, the B, all right, is going to represent what's called the y-intercept. And now I think we're going to be able to kind of go and figure out what the y-intercept is. I think we're probably going to be more comfortable with that now. So the y-intercept is really easy. Basically, it's just where this line chooses to cross the y-axis at. Okay, so in order to be proportional, we had to make sure that this line crossed through, or the y-intercept for it was at 0. So that means in order to be proportional, like we worked on yesterday, this y-intercept had to be 0, or in other words, it could not appear at all. All right, so that's just a little review over our little letters. Now let's make sure we're going back into direct variation. Okay, so here's the little title / definition for it. So direct variation is when two variables are said to vary directly with each other. So a lot of the times in these problems, it's going to say vary directly with whatever. So it's usually going to say like y varies directly with x, something like that. Okay. Like we said, it's the same thing as proportional relationships, but instead, for the most part, you're going to be solving using proportions. All right, just like we said with proportional relationships, direct variation, it always has to go through the origin. Same thing with the equations. For direct variation, you're not going to have a plus b part. And then if you look up here where it says y equals kx, k is going to mean the same thing as slope, or m. So that's what this last little point is saying. K and m are the same thing. So there's a whole lot of different ways you can say slope. There's K, there's M, there's change in Y over change in X, there's rise over run, all sorts of stuff. We're just all learning the different ways to do it. All right, so next step, how to solve for direct variation. So we have to set up a proportion with the values of the x and y's that are given. You have to make sure you put the y's on top and your x's on the bottom. After that, you just cross multiply and divide. So whenever we're dealing with direct variation, instead of using this little proportion setup like this, I like to use kind of this little box setup. The reason I like to do that is because not always are they going to say y varies directly with x. Sometimes they say a vary directly with b. And they like to compare two quantities like water to salt, stuff like that. So we have to kind of know what to be able to put in these first two boxes, okay? So that's why I like to make sure we do kind of like this little box setup right here, okay? But regardless on what you have to make sure you, what letters you're working with, whichever one that they mention first has to go on top, whichever one that they mention second has to go on bottom, okay? So here's an example right here. Suppose y varies directly with x and y is 16 when x is 8. Find y whenever x is 16. Okay, so just like I told y'all up here, they'll let y'all know which two things that they're trying to directly vary with each other. So if y varies directly with x, then we know that the y has to go on top and the x has to go on bottom, because like I said, if they mention y first, y goes on top. If they mention x second, x goes on bottom. All right, so at this point, y equals 16. Where could that go in this little box setup? Since it's a y, it has to go on top. So we're gonna put it right here. And then they say when x is 8. So where does x go? X has gotta go on the bottom. All right, and then they want you to find y for this second little portion whenever x is 16. So once again, where's this x going to go? X has always got to go on the bottom. Okay, so we're missing this number right here. Okay, so what we have to do, just like we said right here, we have to cross multiply and divide. So we're going to cross multiply these two. And I'll put, instead of an x, I'll put multiply. Okay, and then once you cross multiply those, divide by this 8. Okay, so whenever you cross multiply and divide, what do you wind up getting? Hopefully you wind up getting 32 as an answer. Okay, so y is 32 whenever x is 16. That's all you do. Just set it up, cross multiply and divide. All right, so here's some practice problems they wanted you to do, but we're gonna go ahead and just do these together. So it says, circle the equations that are not an example of direct variation. So remember, we said if we're ever dealing with an equation here, we cannot have a plus b. So you can't have any number after the x. All right, so we're going to circle the ones that are not direct variation. All right, so this one would not be direct variation. Why? Because of this plus 7x right here. Okay, this one would also not be direct variation. Why? Because of the minus 9 right here. This one would be, though, because it does not have a plus or a minus number after it. Now, second thing, we got to name the slope in each equation. All right, so which numbers are going to be the slopes in these three? So let's look at this one first. Okay, if you look at y equals 0.25x minus 6, which number is going to be the slope? It's going to have to be this 0.25. There's your slope. What about for this middle one? It's going to have to be the 7. And for this last one right here, where it says y equals negative 3x, it's got to be this negative 3. All right. So then the last portion, they want you to solve this problem using the direct variation proportion, okay? So just like we did right here, do the same exact thing. So they tell you, suppose y varies directly with x, and y equals 21 when x is 3. Find x when y is 42. So we know since they mentioned y varies directly with x, and they put the y first and the x second, y's all got to go on top, x's all got to go on bottom. So set that up, and then you have to cross multiply and divide to get your answer. Okay? Be careful though, because they say to find x when y is 42. Okay, so you're going to be missing an x. You're going to have to solve for an x. So we'll see what you get on there.